Welcome to the Vintage Ballers podcast. I'm your host, Brad Coreno, and on today's episode, we have Dan Largent joining the show. Dan played college football at Otterbein University before becoming the head baseball coach at Olmsted Falls High School, leading them to the state Final Four in 2010. Dan is also a best-selling author of 2 different novels. So without further ado, please welcome Dan Largent. I want to get started, Dan. I want to take it back to your youth. And, I want to start. So growing up in Cleveland and Berea, when did you first fall in love with sports and what were your favorite sports?
I guess the best way to answer that would be to say that I don't remember falling in love with sports just because I can't remember a time where I wasn't in love with sports. And, when I was a little kid, I was big into soccer and baseball. And baseball is my favorite sport. But I love soccer. I wanted to be Kai Hoskevy from the Cleveland Force. I'm sure you probably remember him from those days. And I wanted to be Corey Snyder as I got older. I actually have one of his bats up here. And then, as basketball in the back, it was the classic, 80s childhood where we were outside all day long. Came in for a quick peanut butter sandwich, ran back outside and came home when the street lights came on. And I would not trade that childhood for anything.
There was nothing like those days, man. Like 80s and 90s, it was nothing like that. It was
we learned how to have failure. We learned how to have confrontations and conflicts and conflict resolution. We didn't always handle those conflict resolutions, the best way.
But you had to do it in person. You had to do it face to face.
Right. And, there was just a sense of, I don't know. I feel like in a lot of ways my kids are deprived of that. But I see glimpses of it,
Mm-hmm.
and especially like where we moved into a neighborhood, where we picked out where we wanted to build our house was by how many swing sets we saw in the area. And so like our kids have definitely had a taste of that, but still nothing quite like, the 80s. And
no, and we grew up, Dan, without there was no internet, obviously, at least back in the early 90s, 80s. And then you had Nintendo and you had, Tech Mobile and Baseball Stars, but it wasn't it wasn't like you were doing that 12 hours a day.
That was for rain days.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
If it was raining, okay, we'll go play Nintendo.
Exactly. So it was just very different. And I grew up with an older brother who went to North Olmsted, actually. He was a basketball star back in the day and a baseball star. So I grew up watching him play outside in the snow, and that was the work ethic he had. I didn't get it back then because I was so young. But now I look back, I'm like, that dude was out shooting jumpers when it was, 12 inches of snow outside. So he was built differently, and it made me realize what a work ethic looks like. And he was always outside, him and his best friend. So because of him, I just naturally was the same. I was always outside playing sports. And like you said, neighbors come over and until the streetlights come on, you're playing sports, you're messing around. I'm in my sandbox, whatever I was doing. I loved it. I wouldn't trade it either.
Nothing. And we had in my neighborhood growing up, some of my best friends, Jeff Fernagle and Chris Garcia and all Bob Safadi and all these guys. I hope that they get to see this, and some of them I haven't seen for years, but I remember we would play basketball, and one of them would always be Charles Barkley, and I was always Larry Bird, and we actually would play one-on-one games while the other guy who wasn't playing kept stats.
Now that's awesome. We used to do the same thing.
We typed them out.
You were hardcore about it then.
Oh yeah,
I love that.
So we had a whole like league leaders who's leading the league in 3-pointers, and just that's what we did, and it was the best.
I love you bringing that up. Me and my friends did the exact same thing. We would keep stats. We'd actually have, in baseball, it was 3 of us. And one summer, we just would pitch against each other. And we would have batting averages. We'd have double. We had like a lined up where if you hit it over here, it was a double. If you ground balls, automatic out. And I'll never forget how much fun that was. And back then, you don't realize how great it really is until you get older. You're like, I wish I would do anything to go back to those days and do that over again.
No, and we lived on a dead end street, like a cul-de-sac. And so we had a built-in home run fence by the dry, the cul-de-sac curb. And so, and we didn't have to worry about car, every once in a while a car would come home and we'd, run off to the side and then, all right, game on. And we invented a game called Mush Ball, where we took socks and we taped them up with duct tape. So, it would deaden it. And, like you got the guy out by throwing the ball at him.
Just now, what did you guys use as a backstop?
There was no backstop. If you were pitching and you weren't throwing strikes, and we had a couple mush balls made up, and every probably about 30 minutes we'd have to retape them because they'd start to split and stuff. But there was a lot of pressure to throw strikes, because if you weren't throwing strikes and the ball kept going by, someone else got to pitch. And another great way of conflict resolution. And
it's funny because back then our biggest problem was that it was a cul-de-sac as well in my buddy's neighborhood, and we couldn't figure out a backstop for a while. So we would have a catcher, but then he would get annoyed and wouldn't want to do it. We would always be the guy who's on deck usually, and they didn't want to always do it. So we finally found this huge plywood. I don't know how we kept it up. I can't remember. My buddy figured out a system, but then a car would go by, and it was one of those cul-de-sacs that had like stones in the middle. So like, they would come by, we'd have to move everything over, and then, but I'll never forget all that. And we used a tennis ball. And then we went to wiffle ball later. We actually had a wiffle ball league. I'm not joking. Grown men in their 20s, probably about 10 years ago.
I know quite a few people who do that. I never did that.
It was awesome.
Oh man. Yeah. You know what? I still play baseball. So I play 35 and over baseball. I like to say that we turn a lot of doubles into singles. I've hit quite a few 300-foot singles in my time in the 35 and over league, but it's fun. And it's fun to play the game. You get to stay a kid for a little bit every Saturday.
Oh yeah. Now, Dan, when you grew up an Indians fan, obviously.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So you talk about Corey Snyder and of course Joe Carter and those guys back in the 80s, the Sports Illustrated, we know the whole story as far as, that we were always predicted to do well. We never did. It was the kind of the Cleveland curse back then. Luckily LeBron broke that, but we go to the 90s. Take me through the 90s Indians, and because I had Jack Corrigan on the program, and he talked about just how special that team was. And he was saying he was standing on, I think, the third base side in Game 7 against the Marlins, and he just knew. He's like, when I think it was Jose who he threw a ball the first. I can't remember what he said, but I knew that it wasn't going to. He kept shaking off Sandy, I think what it was, and he said, Brad knew it wasn't going to turn out well, and that team, how special they were, Dan, to not win a World Series. And people not from Cleveland don't understand how big they were here. I mean, it was like the Bulls of the 90s in Cleveland. That's how big the Indians were in the 90s here. It was everything. And just think that team with probably the greatest lineup I've ever seen, not even win a championship. What's your take on that team?
Well, I can kind of sum it up in one story. 95 American League Championship Series. Couple of my buddies, we were in high school, and we stayed up, to watch them win it. And it was a school night, and my mom was a teacher in the district that I went to high school in Berea. And so, I didn't get to play hooky or call off or whatever, when you're a teacher's kid, you don't get to do those things. But it was such a big deal. We wanted to drive to the airport. My buddies and I were like, we want to meet the tribe at the airport when they get back on the plane from Seattle. And so we figured out, like this was, pre-internet days. So like we were going based off of what they were saying on the news, and we stayed up all night, and my mom actually was like, you know what, go for it. And, and you can take the day off tomorrow. And we tried driving to the airport, but there were so many people trying to do the same thing as us. Like we couldn't even get anywhere near Hopkins.
Wow.
And so we ended up turning around and going back and sleeping finally a little bit. But,
got the day off at least.
But those teams, I mean, I was at the game where Jim Thome hit the home run against the Mariners, I believe Randy Johnson. And it was freezing, freezing cold, but there was just such an energy. And I honestly, the only time, I really felt like, okay, the Jake might, like the upper deck might come crashing down on us, it was on that home run. I mean, because the whole place just shook and it was nuts. And, those teams were, I mean, after all the years of losing and, and not living up to the hype, and just some, let's face it, just some really bad teams that went through
Awful.
and some bad times. And, to have that, was, we could hang our hat on it. Even though we didn't win the World Series, we could hang our hat on the fact that we had the Indians, and especially during a time when the Browns had just left.
Exactly.
I mean, God, we needed that. I firmly believe that the Tribe, saved sports in our city during that
I agree. I mean, the Cavs, the Price and Doherty era was kind of ending, so they weren't as exciting. And of course, the Browns left. It was the Indians. I mean, there was no question about it. And it was kind of the perfect storm. I mean, the only thing they didn't do is win the World Series. They did everything else. I mean, every year was exciting. They had superstars, Hall of Famers. That place was packed. I mean, my dad had season tickets on the first base line, 12 rows back. And again, I didn't appreciate it as much as I should have back then. And I look back now and I'm like, I mean, it was just, we were there actually the game they clinched the playoffs for the first time in 41 years. And I remember my dad, someone held me up. I can't remember if it was my brother or somebody. And I was 12 then. I remember Jim Tomey caught the ball at third base and just people were just going. I mean, it was insane. It was like Christmas.
Pandemonium.
Oh, it was unbelievable. And I'll never, again, I was so young. It's a great childhood memory, but I kind of wish I was a little bit older so I could have taken in a little bit more. I didn't understand how special it was at the time.
Yeah, I was, in my high school years at that point in time, and into college in '97. I was in college, and it was awesome. And I think back on all those games. I mean, every time you went, it didn't matter. I mean, you didn't leave. I mean, if the Tribe was down 6 runs in the 7th inning, you didn't leave with that team, because they could just flip a switch and hit back-to-back home runs and be in the game. And if Kenny Lofton was on base, I don't care if it was first, second, or third, if he was on base in a tie game, you knew he was gonna score. If he had any ground ball, it doesn't matter. He was scoring from second, and it was phenomenal.
I mean, think about this. Manny batting 7th. Manny Ramirez. I mean, we're talking about one of the greatest right-handed hitters in the history of baseball, batting 7th in that line. And at that time, it made sense because he couldn't take Albert out of 4. You're not going to take Eddie Murray, a Hall of Famer, out of 5. You're not going to take Tomey out of 6. And Baerga.
I was going to say, Tomey hit 6th, and he's in the Hall of Fame.
I mean, you got Tomey, and then you had probably the worst hitter on the team, and this is no disrespect to him, was Paul Sereno, and he had 22. And that's your worst hitter. And
Eddie hit for average.
Yeah, exactly. And he hit for average. I mean, and Sandy, of course, an all-star catcher, is batting 9th. So you just, and the whole lineup was just, again, I don't think we'll ever see anything close to that again. And I know we could talk about the whole steroid thing, but the steroid or no steroid, it was still the greatest lineup I've ever seen. And I've never, the talent, and again, having those guys all come up at the same time. And even Albert Bell in 95, people forget how great he was in 95. I mean, he was unbelievable. And I think he should have won MVP, quite frankly. No disrespect to move on, but 50-50. I mean, that was, so.
Yeah, Mo wasn't stealing 50 bases that
year. No. Mo was a great player, but I think that obviously that was because he didn't have as much around him. I feel they say, okay, he carried that team. But Albert, I mean, he was the heart and soul of that lineup. I mean, when he was on, we were almost unbeatable. And he was on a lot of the time. So, and I'll never forget that. I think it was Lee Smith or one of those games where he hit a couple grand slams. Actually, one was against Baltimore in the '96 playoffs, and he was just electric. I mean, that Bell, the whole lineup was, again, I'll never forget it. I'm glad they're actually selling T-shirts now in Cleveland. I can't remember who it is. One of the companies in Cleveland is selling the lineup T-shirts with Lofton, Vizquel, Baerga, Bell, etc. So I got to get one of those.
Yes, yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. Right?
So take us back to your high school days and playing sports. I know you're a baseball, football guy. Did you play in high school, and what did your career look like in high school?
I would say in high school, there were peaks and valleys for me. I played football and baseball in high school. I wrestled for a year of high school, but that was before they expanded the weight classes. And I was like that classic, like not big enough to wrestle heavyweight. And also I wasn't very good. I think the best I ever did was 4th place in a JV tournament as a freshman. But, so it made it pretty easy for me to go down to 2 sports after my freshman year. And I played, pickup basketball and stuff. And I played on like a men's team and things like that, because I love basketball. I just wasn't, I was good for 5 fouls a game. That was about it. But my football career, Berea was a very storied program when I started playing there. The fall of '92, that team lost to Menor in the playoffs. But that team was just phenomenal. What a phenomenal team that was.
Who was the coach back then?
That was Tom Madzie's last year.
Okay.
And then after that, we had a couple lean years there. But my senior class, we had a lot of guys play college football, and me being one of them. So I was your classic kid who probably frustrated the coaches a lot, because they saw the potential that I probably could have had with a little bit more work. But I just enjoyed being a multi-sport athlete. I didn't want to like quit baseball just to work on football. And I think that kind of ruffled my coach's feathers a little bit. In fact, I know it did, because he talked to me about it on numerous occasions. But I loved being a multi-sport athlete and just kind of being in the moment. Ironically, I didn't really have any aspirations of playing football in college. I thought I was going to be a baseball player in college. And unfortunately, I wasn't smart enough to realize that there wasn't a big market for basically guys who were good as a designated hitter, first base, maybe catcher, and who weren't that great defensively. So, in my mind, though, baseball was my love, though. So I wasn't really thinking football until my senior year, when it finally dawned on me that, okay, I got recruited for both football and baseball. And in fact, when I went to Otterbein, where I ended up going, I was going to play both. They recruited me as a catcher, which I barely did after my junior year of high school. I mean, I caught a little bit here and there, but they liked the now head coach, George Powell. He recruited me as a catcher. And it wasn't until I went there that I realized, okay, I'm just going to do one sport in college, because it's hard enough even at a small school. And so that's when I stuck with football.
And when did you, going into Otterbein, was that your first choice, or was it something that kind of came out of nowhere? How did you get involved with Otterbein?
I knew nothing about Otterbein, except I knew they played BW, because my family, everyone in my family went to BW. I was recruited by all the OAC schools, Mount Union, BW, Otterbein, most of the NCAC schools, and then actually had some scholarship money to some NAIA and Division II type stuff, or NAIA 2, and could have walked on at some bigger schools, but Otterbein, basically, I took the visit because there were some former Berea guys who coached there, and it was a day off of school. So
funny how that works out.
I'll take the day off of school, because it was an excused absence if you went on a college visit. So drove down 71 and fell in love with the coach, Wally Hood, the late Wally Hood, who coached with Lee Tressel at BW.
Oh, wow.
He was his defensive coordinator, and he recruited me hard. I mean, Mount Union recruited me hard, BW recruited me hard, and Otterbein. Those three really were probably like that and Ohio Wesleyan. Those were my top four as far as like calling me all the time, pulling me to where it was the head coaches calling me. But Coach Hood, he would come up and watch my high school baseball games.
No kidding.
I was like your classic, D3 guy, like probably like a little bigger than most guys who get recruited to D3. Maybe if I would have worked a little harder in high school or something, or just focused on football, I would have went to a bigger school. So pretty much every D3 school that recruited me said the magic words, "You're going to play as a freshman." And all of them, they all were selling me on that. Would it have happened at a place like Mount Union? I don't know, but that's what they were selling me on. So in my mind, it was, I want to play. I knew that the OAC was great football, And, you know, growing up and watching it, you know, I loved those BW teams of the 80s and 90s. I used to go, I knew every player on the team, you know, and you know, was it Matt Coase, the quarterback in the early 90s. And, you know, I knew all these teams. And so I knew that D3 football was no slouch. And when I went and finally decided to play at Otterbein, you know, it was, I wanted to go to a smaller school. I wanted to play right away. I didn't want to, you know, be a tackling dummy for 2 or 3 years. And so I knew I had that opportunity at Otterbein, and I started as a freshman at tight end. And so it was the right choice. And Coach Hood, he was, you know, he was a great recruiter, and he had a 5-year plan. And he told us when he was recruiting, we were year 2, our freshman class was year 2 of the 5-year plan. You know, we ended up being nationally ranked as seniors, and
wow,
you know, we had a really good season that year, went 7-3, and that man was hard on us. But I also learned so much from him, and from my position coach, Dave Smith, who I'm still very close to this day. You know, those 2 guys had such a big impact on my life, and I don't regret 1 second of going there. And I'm so glad that I took that day off of school to go down there, because I loved the campus, I loved the school, and it was just the right fit for me.
Seemed like it worked out really well for you, and it's just ironic how it does work out. You're just taking a day off just to take a day off, and then ends up, you know, really,
right,
you know, making a huge
yeah.
impact.
I mean, I could have ended up, you know, walking on at Kent State and being a tackling dummy for 2 years and blowing my knee out or something. You know, who knows? And
yep.
and I'm glad that I went to where I was wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and that's served me pretty well in life so far, is, you know, knowing, you know, go where you're wanted. And as a coach, that's what I would always tell our players, like, don't get hung up on the division, don't get hung up on, you know, oh, I got to be D1 or what. Go where you're wanted. Like, you'll know if they want you or not. Mm-hmm. And you know, I knew Otterbein really wanted me, and they made sure I knew that. And so that's important.
I think it's important for a lot of the younger kids listening who are being recruited, you know, and I have my nephews are getting at that age, and you know, I think it's easy to get sucked into the bigger schools, or that, you know, all of that, and that's fine if that's what you really want. But
if they're after you,
oh yeah, if they're, you know, if they really want you, that's a different story. But right. My brother, who was a star basketball player, I mean, he averaged 31 points a game his senior year, was a leading scorer in Cleveland. And he was recruited by some obviously big schools, but he ended up going to an NAI school called Rio Grande in Southern Ohio.
Yeah.
So, you know, and he was only 2-time MVP of the conference to this day. And he loves it. He would never have traded that for the world. And he's going to hate me talking about him, because he hates being talked about. But the point is, he went down there and he met his wife there. I mean, everything kind of worked out perfectly for him, and he kind of followed his gut, so to speak, followed his intuition. So it's a great learning, you know, experience for anybody to know you don't have to go to the biggest school to make an, you know, to make an impact on your own life. And I want to take you back. You talked about playing tight end. Looking at tight end in the 90s, Dan, compared to now, especially in college and the NFL, it's so different, obviously. And
right.
You know, I think guys like Tony Gonzalez kind of revolutionized it, and Antonio Gates, obviously playing at Kent and then going in the NFL and basically Hall of Famers. You know, what was tight end? How was it played in the 90s as opposed to now?
Well, as you can tell, my college jersey's hanging up behind me, and you can see that by the time I was a senior, I was wearing 54.
I was going to ask you about that.
So I used to be number 82, and you know, there were a couple factors in that, but my freshman year, like I said, I started right away. I was a pure tight end, you know. I was you know, I wasn't a blocking tight end. I mean, I caught 6 passes in one game my freshman year, which is like my big claim to fame, I guess. But you know, so I could run routes, I could catch passes. I wasn't gonna, you know, blow anyone away with my blazing 5 flat 40, but I could catch the ball. I had pretty good hands and could go over the middle and things like that, and I could block. But we started to see it about halfway through my freshman year. You know, I was spending as many snaps split out wide like a wide receiver as I was in a 3-point stance, and I was going in motion all the time. And we had a great quarterback who transferred in from Youngstown State named Matt D'Orazio, who went on to win 2 Arena League MVPs. Wow. And 2 Arena Bowls. And great quarterback. And he was my roommate freshman year, and one of the best competitors I've ever played with in my life. And he, he was so good. And I started to go, all right, we're going to be a spread offense, we're going to spread out more. And my sophomore year, I hurt my knee in training camp. I had actually already started the transition of changing positions. I went over to the defensive line, and in the preseason game, I tore the meniscus in my knee in a couple spots. I ended up playing the whole season on it. And my coaches were really good about it because they knew that, that I was hurting, and it was hard for me to go from being an every down player starter as a freshman to I barely would practice during the week. And then I'd suit up on Saturday, and they would put me at defensive line, tight end, H-back, fullback. Like, they kind of put me like in short yardage whenever they could get me in. And, so they kept me engaged for another year. But then I had surgery, and they said, have you ever thought about playing offensive line? And I said, well, the last time I played was in 8th grade. I was a center, and I loved being a center. And because that way, you're involved in every play, and you're making the line calls and snapping the ball. And my junior and senior year, I played center, and the rest was history with that. And we had a guy named Jeff Gibbs. I know you're a basketball fan. I don't know if you're aware of Jeff Gibbs, but he was a tight end on our football team, and like the more hybrid Antonio Gates type tight end, All-American in basketball and football at Otterbein, won a national championship, and he's still playing overseas in Japan.
Wow.
And he just won that the TBT in 2019 with Carmen's crew. And so that $2 million tournament in the summer. Wow. And he was like one of the only guys who didn't actually play at Ohio State that was on that team. But he was like, seeing him play tight end made me go, yeah, I'm not the new, like he's got that. I'll snap the ball and protect our quarterback so he can throw it to Jeff, because he was such a phenomenal athlete, and it just really, the writing was on the wall. I mean, a traditional tight end in the mid 90s, by the late 90s, we were in a dying breed.
I was going to ask you about that. And, you look at, like, obviously Ozzie Newsome was kind of a anomaly. That way he was very rare. He was different. He was, kind of a hybrid receiver. He was very different, but most tight ends were, like you said, more blocking. It was, it was more old school. It wasn't as much like the run, like you see now with Njoku with the Browns. I mean, he's running routes basically. He's not just
right.
So, and he has almost a bigger receiver's body than he does a tight end's body. So it's very different. It's only been 20 some years. It's not like it's been 50 years. So it's changed so much, and it's really not. You don't even notice the position anymore. It's so different. And I think it's funny because tight end in the NFL and college, especially in the NFL, Dan, is so important now. And you can really, mismatch problems all over the place when you have a great tight end in the NFL now, because the linebackers can't cover them. They're too big for the safeties. So it's really presenting a lot of problems. But it's just interesting to hear your perspective from back in the 90s to now and how it's changed.
I like to say I graduated about 4 years too early from high school, because maybe 4 years earlier it would have been a different story for me, but it all worked out. And I'll tell you what, playing center those last 2 years, I wouldn't trade that for the world anyways. Like, I loved it.
And what did you learn playing on the offensive line?
First of all, just that you had communication. I mean, I would say half of the times there's an offensive protection breakdown, it has nothing to do with the physical part of it. It's just someone didn't, pass off to the next guy, or, didn't switch on a stunt or things like that. And, so if you had someone who could communicate well at the center position, which is something that I prided myself on, was making line calls. I even had the freedom to call audibles from time to time, and just someone who kind of saw the whole picture and could talk and communicate. And I was probably the smallest guy on my offensive line in my senior year, and I think I was 6'2", 265. for a D3 school, like that's, most of the guys were bigger than me. And I was blocking guys who were a lot bigger than me most of the time. But it was just such a, you had to be, in sync with each other, and you had to really trust each other. And it was like, the offensive linemen, there's a reason that they are always in the locker room together, and their lockers are all by each other. And we would Friday nights, we'd call it hog night. We were the hogs, and we would cook out steaks or burgers or go get food from somewhere. And it was just, you had to have that sort of camaraderie with each other in order to work as a unit to protect your skill players. And we knew, we knew when you have a quarterback like Matarazzo, you wanted to make sure that you protected him. And we had a running back named Shane Ranabarger, who was a 1,000-yard rusher, who was just a beast. And and we wanted to make sure that we took care of those guys, and we took pride in making sure. We wanted Matt's uniform to be clean at the end of the game. We took pride.
When you guys are facing a really good defensive line, and maybe guys who are bigger than you, for example, like if you had a guy 20, 30 pounds bigger, and what was your philosophy? How did you approach that?
In the OAC, every week was a test. It didn't matter if you were playing Mount Union or Capital, or, it was, there were very few weeks off. And for me, it was, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. I was a prick when I played. Most people that know me outside of football probably wouldn't ever imagine me being that way on the field. But when I was on the field, I was a jerk, and I wasn't dirty. But I knew how to talk a little during the game, but never to where I would get a flag or anything like that. But I knew how to get other people to react to that stuff. And for me, if I wasn't bigger than the guy over me, I was going to try to get a psychological advantage on them. I would study I would study the scouting report, so I knew where they went to high school. This was early internet days, so like we didn't have social media and stuff. Otherwise, I would have known their girlfriends' names and things like that. But I knew everything I could know about them before we played, and so I might pepper a few of those things here and there during the game. But yeah, I liked, I went to the whistle, and it unfortunately, I think it hurt me, like in regards to being like first team all conference or something like that, just because I think there were some coaches who probably really didn't like me that we played against, but I didn't care about that stuff. I just cared about doing my job. And so I knew that I knew what my teammates thought of me, and that was the most important.
And what is your favorite memory at Otterbein playing football?
Beating BW my senior year, without a doubt, on our home field. Being the guy, we hadn't beat them since like 1932 or something.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
This was fall of '99. So I mean, it had been for, I don't know, because BW was a juggernaut for so many years.
Oh, yeah.
And then the year before my junior year, they embarrassed us at their place, and that was the year we thought maybe we would do a little better against them than we did. And they came in, and it was electric. I mean, it was a sold out crowd, and the place was shaking, and, for a small school, and it was, beating them. So many of my family members were there, and, and it just was, that night was, I walked on a cloud for a week after that win. And that was a very special moment for me. And then I guess the other one would be, but we played Mount Union. I think we were on ESPN and stuff like that because it was the game that they broke the streak.
Oh, really?
The Oklahoma streak. Yeah, it was against us.
Wow.
And it was a game. It was a game until the second half. But we were right in it. We were giving them all we could, and we just we couldn't stop the deep ball against them. But we did okay, and they were so good. But that was kind of cool because I mean I don't know how many people were there. It felt like 20,000. I don't know if it was that many, but I mean, it was packed, and it was probably like 10,000, but it felt like 20. But it was pretty cool. Seeing all the ESPN cameras and trucks out on the field, and being on Sports Center and all that stuff. So those were my top two moments.
Those are two pretty good moments. I bet I was watching that game too, that Mount Union game. I can't remember.
Yeah,
I would bet I was. I was.
Joe Tate did the local broadcast.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, Joe's the best. I rest in peace. I love Joe.
Yeah,
he was
definitely.
That's a whole different conversation, but he was the best. I want to take it now to after Otterbein, and you're obviously you tried out for the Cowboys and the Buccaneers. Take us through those experiences.
Well, if you see on the shirt, this is from my good friend Phil Bova that you interviewed a few episodes ago. And whenever I sign my books, I always write "Dream Big," and it's just kind of my thing. And it's served me really well in life up till this point. And my senior year of college, I decided I'm going to mess around. But my coaches, by the time I was a senior, they kind of just let me do what I wanted to do pregame and stuff like that. So I was, I prided myself on being our emergency punter, and just doing dumb stuff before the game. And it's how I would stay loose. And so then, like, the one game I started like long snapping just for fun. And I remember one of my coaches was like, "Why didn't you tell us you could do that?" And I was like, "I didn't know I could do it. I was messing around, and I was pretty good at it." And so, to make a long story short, one, it doesn't hurt to have the last name Largent when it's in the NFL.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
And two is there were some, there was a guy named Dave Mays who played for the Browns, who saw me play my last game, and he encouraged me to make a tape and send it around to NFL teams and stuff. And so I literally spliced together a highlight tape using two VHS players. This is after I graduated. I was by no means the best player on my college football team. We had lots of guys get NFL tryouts from a D3 school. I didn't even tell most of them that I was going to try out for these teams, because I was like embarrassed by it that I'm getting this shot, but I could snap. And I had a video of me playing tight end, of me playing H-back, of me playing defensive line, of me playing center. That was one of the blessings of playing all those positions, is I had game footage of me playing all these different positions and being just about at that cutoff 6'2", 265 size. And also I had video of me snapping. And so I sent the tape to all 32 NFL teams. And I ended up getting a tryout with the Cowboys up at University School with Jason Garrett's dad, who's the longtime the longest tenured NFL scout. And he worked me out up at University School. And the funny story about that, or two funny things about that, is one is I almost broke my nose about 10 seconds before I was supposed to start doing the workouts. I took a ball off the nose. One of my good friends went up with me for like moral support. His name's Brian Zartman, and we were in each other's weddings and stuff. And we were warming up beforehand, and I was doing a turn drill, and let's say the ball hit me in the nose. I was doing the workout with like tissue stuffed up.
Oh my God.
Nose. But the other is, he put me through, like, it felt like 2 hours of stuff, but it was probably like an hour. And there was another guy there. He's a fullback, I think. And I don't remember I can't remember where college he was from, but I thought the guy did pretty well too. I thought he did a pretty good job. And afterwards, Mr. Garrett dressed this guy down. Like, "You wasted my time," all this stuff. Wow. He's just giving it to this guy, like, "Why are you coming in here out of shape?" And I'm just like, "Ooh, what's he going to say to me?" Because I thought this guy did pretty good. So I'm sitting there going, "Oh crap. Like, what did I get myself into here?" But he was very complimentary of me. In fact, I honestly thought walking out of there, he said that, he was going to recommend that, they take a look at me, maybe invite me to camp. I don't know. He said, one of those "we'll be in touch" type of deals. And So I knew it wasn't just like him, blowing sunshine at me because of what he just said to the guy before me. And so I was like, so I had that hope that, okay, well, wouldn't it be cool just to be in a camp, and it never ended up working out. But then the Buccaneers invited me down during one of their mini camp sessions. And so I got to fly down to Florida, and Dave Mays ended up going with me down there, and tried out for the Buccaneers down at One Bucks Place. And when I was down there, I mean, the team was down there, and Tony Dungy was standing over me while I was long snapping.
No kidding. And that was like the Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks days.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
John Lynch. Yeah, they were loaded.
Yeah. I have a Warren Sapp story, but I'm not going to tell it on this interview. But yeah, I mean, everyone there. I mean, Tony Dungy is, I was a nobody from a small school, and when he, pulled me in the office to tell me, like, yeah, you're cut. He spent like 20 minutes with me in there, and he was talking about, me playing arena football as a possibility. And he likened me to Dave Moore, who was a tight end for the Buccaneers and the Bills, because we were about the same size. And he got in the league. It took him a couple of years to get in the league, and he was like 6'1", 6'2", but he could long snap, and he kind of worked himself into it. And he felt that, if I really applied myself, maybe I could be like a Dave Moore. And the only thing is that I had just graduated from college a couple of days earlier. I had my teaching degree. I had 0 jobs lined up because I was trying to make it in football. But when I was down there in Tampa Bay, it was very obvious to me that I did not belong there. It was awesome to be there. I was treated like any other pro. Like I said, Tony Dungy is just class act. I mean, after he cut me, I was like, can I get a picture with you? Because you're my grandma's favorite person in the world. And he's like, oh, absolutely. He's like, but we can't take one here. Let's go take one in front of the stadium mural. And I mean, just couldn't have been nicer. So that I'll always treasure that experience. But it was very obvious. I mean, there were guys twice my size running faster than me through drills. And, it was so cool to be asked to come down and to be a part of it. And I didn't embarrass myself by any means, but I knew that these guys are a different level. And I knew that going into it, but I really knew when I left. And it was a very, I'm not even gonna say it was a humbling moment, because I didn't expect to be at their level when I was there, but it was reassuring almost to me that, okay, it's time for the next chapter in your life. Like, this was really cool. You got to do something that very few people ever get to do. You probably didn't even deserve it to begin with, but you got to do it. And like, just wrap that up and keep that in your, in your memory bank, and enjoy it and move on to the next part of your life. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I wasn't chasing any ghosts or anything. I was very fulfilled with my athletic career in football.
I love that. That's a great story. And you're right. When you look back at it, I mean, it's not about, like you said, you didn't even really expect to do any of that after,
no,
especially. So it was just
God, no.
almost a bonus.
Like I wasn't even close to being the best football player on my small college football team. I mean, there were so many great players who I played with. Roger Aliff, who was the best linebacker I've ever been around, natural linebacker. Unfortunately for him, he was 5'11", 220 pounds, but he was, first team all conference. He was all American at Otterbein. But I mean, if he was 6'2", 220, he would have been in the NFL, wow. But these guys were all so much better football players than me. Ben Strebe, Matt Tarazio, Shane Ranaber. I mean, the list can go on and on and on these guys that were better than me. But that being said, like, it was such an amazing experience.
Yeah, that had to be. I mean, that's cool how and it's ironic how you beat BW, your hometown, school. And you beat them. I mean, it's a pretty cool run throughout your whole story about playing there. So I think, and when you look now, I want to fast forward into your coaching career. How did your experience at Otterbein, propel you into your coaching career?
Well, I I didn't have a job. You know, I just came back from Tampa. My late father, Jeff, he picked me up at the airport, and we went to Tony K's on Bagley
I know
Road.
Tony K's, yep.
And I'll never forget that. And we went there, and we had some dinner, and we talked, and you know, he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, you know, I want to be a teacher, and I want to be a coach. And I'm ready just to like move on and do that. Because he said, you know, basically that was one of those, all right, so if you're gonna do the arena football thing, if you're gonna hire a personal trainer, you're gonna work out 6 hours a day, you're gonna deliver pizzas to make money in the spare time, and you know, and basically your life is gonna revolve around trying to make it as a football player. And I just knew that wasn't it. It wasn't in the cards for me. And but that experience did teach me was that don't be afraid to put yourself out there, because you never know who might accept the offer, right? And to dream. And I mean, two NFL teams took a chance on me that never would have had I not sent those films out and stuff. And you know, I wasn't on Mel Kiper's list or anything like that. And so, you know, I did the same thing with my teaching job. I got a shirt and tie on one day, and I went door to door, and this is mid-June, and there's no teaching jobs available in mid-June. And I had worked on the Olmsted Falls Middle School. Olmsted Falls was the last school district I went to. And it was because just geographically, it was the last one to hit. I went in a big circle. I went door to door with resumes, and no one had jobs. Everyone wanted me to coach, substitute teach, hall monitor, but no one had jobs. Well, I walked into Olmsted Falls, and I had actually worked on the excavating crew that built at the time, the new middle school. And I used to think, wow, it would be really cool to teach at that building. It's brand new. And the day that I went there, the secretary was on lunch. Some guy in a golf shirt answered the door at the board office. And I said, I know you probably don't have any jobs, but here's my resume. Well, it turns out he was the assistant superintendent, and a 7th grade teaching position had just opened up. They were interviewing someone else for it, I think. He made a phone call, said, do you know where the middle school is? I said, I built it. You know, like that's how I answered it. You know, like I built it. You know, I pushed a shovel around a little bit and directed traffic, but he looked at me like, what? And I said, well, no, I mean, I worked on that when that school was being built. I worked on that job site. And I said, so I know where it is. And the rest is history. I got hired and started coaching football right away under the great Jim Ryan. And my very first year at Olmsted Falls, I coached 8th grade football. But then Coach Ryan was really good about like incorporating the newer, younger coaches in the postseason. So like, I was on the sidelines when we won the state championship in 2000.
I was going to ask you about that, because I'm from Avon Lake, so my buddies all played football for Avon Lake, and we actually beat you that year.
You were our only loss that year.
And it was we actually beat 2 state champions, St. Peter Chanel and Olmsted Falls. It was the only team in the state to beat 2 state championships, and we lost in the second round, of course. But I was actually kind of happy to see you guys win it, because obviously it made us look better, and it was cool to have someone from the SWC win the state championship. That was incredible. So I think a lot of people secretly from Avon Lake were rooting for you guys.
Right. Yeah, they wouldn't admit it though. Right?
And back then, I'll tell you what, though, there were some heated. Amherst was good. There were some great teams in the SWC, and there were some great battles back then. It really was.
Huge battles, you know, and what a charmed life. I mean, my first year coaching, got a state championship ring, and you know, and then I coached baseball that year with Dick Zally, another legend. So I got to learn under 2 Hall of Fame coaches in Jim Ryan and Dick Zally, and that team went 25-1.
Wow.
You know, and in baseball, I mean, they were just a phenomenal team, and so like I just walked into a perfect situation. You know, I like to tell people that like, as far as teaching and coaching jobs go out of college, like I won the lottery, you know, and the situation that I was in.
And who did you guys play in the state championship game that year in 2000? Do you remember?
Piqua.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. When my buddy went to Avon Lake, Mike DeAndrea, who played for Ohio State.
Yeah.
One of his roommates was Quinn Pitcock for Ohio State.
He was on that team.
Yeah. Oh, okay. There you go. Yep. I was going to ask you about that. No kidding.
Yep.
Wow. I
Yeah.
mean, you talk about all the talent in Ohio, just loaded. But I remember that Olmsted Falls championship very well. Everyone in Avon
Yeah.
Lake does. Yep.
Yeah. And then 2 years later, we made the state Final Four in football. And that was a wild ride too. And, it was just like, it was like 1 year after the next. It was, I was like, I can get used to this.
Now, with Olmsted Falls, like obviously the culture there, it's a winning culture. And like you said, Hall of Fame coaches. How did that prep you for when you eventually became the head coach in baseball, 10 years later? What was take us through those 10 years and what you learned?
Well, I can tell you that, I took, I think coaches and teachers, people like that, we're all thieves, right? We steal what works from the people that we respect. And, so I can tell you that whether it was from the coaches I played for, Wally Hood and Dave Smith and all the other great coaches I had in high school and college, and or the guys I coached under, or coached alongside, not just necessarily the head coaches, but a lot of the guys that I coached alongside. I coached eighth grade football 1 year with Bill McGrain, who's a Hall of Fame wrestling coach, but he also coached middle school football. And, I stole so much stuff from those guys. And when I say steal, I mean it in the best possible sense, and just I am, would put things in the back of my head and see how they would react to certain situations. And it definitely, it was such a wonderful, blessing for me to be around those guys before I ever became a head coach. And trust me, there were times where I was impatient because, I wanted to be a head coach, and I almost left a couple times to go some places to be a head coach. And I was chomping at the bit to be a head coach because I had goals of my own, and I was getting to be close to 30 years old, and, I wanted to be a head coach. And so when it finally did happen for me, though, again, everything just kind of worked out the right way. And my first year as head baseball coach was 2010. And, when Dick Zally retired, he didn't leave the cupboard bare. I had a great team that I inherited. And we went down to South Carolina and went 4-0, won a tournament in South Carolina against some really good competition. And we were flying high and came back, and I'm thinking, look at me. I'm a pretty awesome coach. Well, all we did then after that was just find so many ways to lose games. And I went through the emotional ringer because I knew we had a good team. We just didn't have a lot of depth at pitching. And so it really tested us. But we would see these little glimmers of hope during the year. We'd play a non-conference game against Mentor and we'd beat them, or Toledo St. Francis, or these teams that, we shouldn't probably have beaten, and we would win. And in the preseason, I had scheduled a scrimmage with St. Ignatius because every year we would lose to St. Ignatius in the district playoffs. And when I was an assistant, and I said, you know what, I want to scrimmage them before the season so we can get that whole mystique thing out of our head. And my whole thought was, we're going to get a chance at them, in the playoffs. And the great thing about baseball was everyone makes the tournament. So we were under 500 going into the tournament. I mean, we were the 7th seed, I believe, in the Lakewood district.
Really?
I mean, yeah, we were not highly ranked.
I didn't realize you were that low. Wow.
Yeah. The only way we would have won, or the only way we would have been above 500 is if we would have ran the table and won the state championship.
No kidding.
So we were an under 5, but I knew we were a much better team than our record. We had a first year coach who made some mistakes along the way, and me, self-admittedly. But also we didn't have a deep pitching staff, but we did have 2 really good pitchers. And so when you're playing 5 or 6 games a week, you can't compete when you only have, we had other, quality high school pitchers, but like 2 guys who were, like aces, Denton Sagerman and Cam Trefney. And, and they, once we got into, hey, we only have to play 2 games a week, in the playoffs, like we can do this. And so we viewed that team, they were the most mature team I ever coached. They didn't care about what their record was. It was basically we were gonna believe, and we did. And we knocked off some giants to get there. I mean, we beat Dan Ward and Garfield Heights in the sectional championship, and he was MAC freshman of the year or whatever. He threw in the 90s, and we beat him. We beat St. Ignatius in the district championship game. We beat Strongsville. We went down 5 runs in the first inning to Strongsville, never panicked, came back and won 6-5. And it was because we had Denton and Chaz. Chaz McGrain was our catcher, and he was the best defensive high school catcher I ever was around. And just what a leader. His dad, Bill, was the guy that I coached with.
Oh, okay.
He was, he had that, he ended up coaching for me later. Denton's the director of baseball operations at Indiana University right now. Cam Trefney had probably the best high school playoff run out of any athlete ever that I can think of in modern history, at least. I mean, he just was on fire. He was hitting home runs, pitching lights out to get saves against teams like Strongsville and Ignatius and whatever. And then we just had a lot of really good talent, and we played Perrysburg in the regional championship to go down to Columbus, and we jumped out to a big lead and then held on for dear life. And then we made it to the state Final Four, and it was just such a magical time. And unfortunately, we ended up playing St. Ed's that year in 2010, and they had Stetson Alley, who was an Olmsted Falls kid. He didn't pitch against us, but he threw like 100 miles an hour in high school or whatever. He's still pitching in AAA for Tampa Bay, I think. But they were a better team than us. And if we played them 10 times, we might get them once or twice if we play our best game. But it just to go down to the state. It was the first time our school had ever been to the state Final Four, and it was just a magical time.
Yeah, it had to be. And you were the Greater Cleveland Division I Coach of the Year, correct?
Yeah, that year with a losing record. but we had it was so wild. When we made the state Final Four that year, we were featured on Yahoo. This under 500 teams just made the state Final Four on their national page. I was getting interviewed by ESPN radio while I'm in homeroom. I'm like telling my class, like, okay, be quiet. I have to do an interview with ESPN right now.
I love it.
and it was such a cool experience,
It has to be awesome.
Yeah, I've been very blessed. I think, sometimes, and it's been one of those things where, sometimes you feel like things aren't going the way you want them to. And, and it all ends up working out, if you, and just don't be afraid to keep putting yourself out there. It's been a wild ride.
Dan, getting back to your whole coaching career, how, because I've had multiple coaches on this program, and I like asking them this question: how did you handle conflict amongst the team?
It depended on what type of leaders I had on the team. Like that 2010 year, I didn't have to worry about too much conflict on the team, even during the down times, because I knew if there was, I would just call Chaz and I'd say, hey, Chaz, take care of this. Mm-hmm. And he would, because he was that type of leader, but then there were other years where we didn't have as strong a leadership. And, and that's where, I really think I did my best coaching with my teams that weren't really good. We had some teams that were, 9-20 and stuff like that, but we'd always end up making a run in the postseason. But, we'd be playing our best baseball by then, but that's when we started, instituting some of the things that became part of the fabric of our program, like the captain's meetings and the communication. I would take my players out to, like, individuals out to lunch, we go to Subway or whatever, and, just talk. And that's how, I'm an over communicator. And I really think that usually nips most conflict in the bud.
And what's the number one thing that you've taken away from coaching, that coaching has taught you?
That there is no one right way of doing things. And just because what Bill Belichick does works for him doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone else. You got a lot of guys out there coaching Pee Wee football who try to be Bill Belichick with 9-year-olds, and guess what? It's not going to work.
Nope.
You got a lot of guys who try to be, the cerebral Joe Madden, and as baseball coaches, and that's Joe Madden. Like, that's why he can do that. Tito can be Tito.
Yep.
Like, you have to find your own voice and what works best for you. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of guys just try to emulate one person, and say, I'm going to, I like the way, that guy does it. And I want to coach just like him. And for me, it was taking the best of everyone that I worked with, all my mentors, and just trying to put it together and do my best. And knowing that I still, failed in a lot of ways.
But I think you're a pretty modest guy, and I think you're willing to admit, like, look, I might have made some mistakes here, and that's what makes you a great coach, I think. And like you said, there's only one Bill Belichick, there's only one Joe Madden, Joe Torre, et cetera. So I think it's when you look at, it's funny because I know people who do try to emulate a guy like Belichick, for example. I was laughing when you said they try to do it to 9-year-olds. It's just that you can't. 9-year-olds aren't at that. The developmental wise, they're not going to respond to the same things that a 25-year-old NFL player is going to respond to. So it's just that people don't realize that, and I think it's really being yourself. Like, and you seem to me someone who is himself. You're comfortable being yourself, and I think that's what probably made you a good communicator and a good coach. So when you look back now at your whole career playing and coaching, what are some lessons you can take into your personal life as far as, like patience and things like that? What are some things that you have learned from all of your years of being, playing baseball, football, and coaching baseball and football?
Well, I think that, I think everyone who wants to be a coach should attempt teaching, first, because really, I mean, I coached, but my profession is I'm a teacher. I mean, I teach, I'm a teacher. I'm 21st year teaching. And I feel that that's really what prepared me more than anything, as far as taking away patience. I mean, I teach 7th grade. There's never a dull moment.
Oh, I can't imagine.
Yeah. I mean, there is never, but I love it. To this day, I love it. I love teaching 7th graders. And because they're old enough that you can have some fun with them, but they're also young enough that there's still that level of respect, and but you have to have patience. and I really feel that patience was definitely not my virtue early in my life, especially my adult life. It wasn't at all. But I feel like it's turned into one of my greatest assets.
And transitioning now into your writing, because I think it's fascinating that you're a writer, and I'm a writer as well, and I understand, not at your level, but I understand the diligence that I mean, it's a lot that goes into writing, and people don't see a lot of time, a lot of effort. And I've written literally thousands of pages of stuff, and I'll never publish, but it's just how it's done. But with you have a couple success stories now. You have a couple bigger books. Take us into, how did you become an author, and what kind of what occurred for you to get into writing?
Well, it's a really long story, but no, I love writing. I've always loved writing. Going back to when I was a little kid, I loved the library. I loved when my mom would take me to the library. There was something magical about the library. I don't know why. And I always, I would have my mom buy me those. I don't know if you remember those, like those blank hardcover books. They were like blank white hardcovers with the blank pages inside, and you could make your own book. And it looked like a children's book when you were done with it, and so I would write my own books, and I never finished them. I was really good at starting them, and that's a microcosm of what would happen as an author. So I would always get these ideas, and I like to say that I'm blessed with ADHD, because I'm always into trying new things, and I'm not afraid to try new things, learning instruments, and doing that, dabbling in this and dabbling in that. And The brain doesn't shut off very well at times. And so I get these ideas and I'm like, oh, long drives, like the music could be on, but I'm imagining like a whole movie plot in a 2-hour trip, and, or a book or whatever. And so finally, like I decided, I'm going to write a book. Well, I started and I got about 8 or 10 chapters in, and this was, before I had kids. So early 2000s. And then all of a sudden we started having kids. So the book itself, that became, before we ever spoke, it actually used to be called Stucky's Place. And it was a totally different book. But the base, the foundation was there. And then I visited my family down in past Christian, Mississippi, after Hurricane Katrina, and I saw the devastation, and a light bulb went off in my head as to where I wanted to go with that book. The only problem is that, I had little kids and there wasn't a whole lot of time. So I would type a little here and there, but nothing much until about 2000. After I when I stepped down from coaching after the 2017 season, I decided, okay, I'm going to turn 40, in another year. And I want, as a bucket list thing, I always said I would write a book by the time I was 40. So I had to get to work. And so I would type at night, 10 p.m., wake up at 5 a.m. and type. If we were somewhere for the weekend at a hotel and I couldn't sleep, I'd be in the hotel lobby at 3:30 in the morning typing. And so I just did it. I just got to the point I will never, ever, ever forget. And I didn't tell anyone outside of my wife and a couple close friends that I was even doing this, because I didn't want to be that guy that says, oh, I'm writing a book, and then never writes the damn book. Mm-hmm. It's like, don't be that guy. It's a pet peeve of mine. And so like, I didn't tell it, I didn't want it, because I didn't want it to be a letdown if I didn't follow through on it, and so I just would type and type, and finally, I'll never forget typing those last words when I knew I was done. And I actually, I cried, because I realized I just typed 85,000 words, and it's amazing. Done. And so then it was, okay, well, what do I do now? And one of my professors at Otterbein, Dr. James Gorman, who has published author himself, he was my favorite professor at Otterbein, and we still would keep in touch. And that's the beauty of going to a small school. And I reached out to him, and he said, send it to me. And I said, let me know what you think. Well, within like a couple of days, he got back to me with notes on everything. And just as he was as a professor, he was, he was kind where he needed to be, but he also, told me where, some things were garbage and like, get rid of this, you don't need this. And so he was he gave me the confidence to go forward with it. And he said, I said, well, what do I do now? Like, do I send it to publishers? And he said, you have two choices. He's like, if you really just want to publish the book, he's like, do it yourself. He's like, otherwise, I would say, quit your job for a year, do a bunch of rewrites, pay a lot of money, hire a literary agent and all this stuff. He's like, but if all you really care about is having the book, just publish it yourself. He's like, and I'll never forget, he said, it's a damn good book. And when he said that, like, I went, okay. And so I didn't even try to get it traditionally published. And still, as of this point, there were maybe 5 people who knew about this. I had another friend who's an author who I sent it to. And then one of my friends from college who I really respected as a writer, I sent it to him as well. And, and got feedback from them. And so I think I paid like $35 to have someone design the cover. I don't even know who the person is. I did it through the website Fiverr.
Yep, I've done that before.
Yeah, and they do. I mean, both of those book covers are from
they're
Fiverr.
good. Yeah,
they're awesome. And I paid someone else I didn't know. The only mistake I really feel I made was I paid an editor, and she did a good job, but she didn't. I think I paid her like $150 or something or whatever to edit it, and she did a good job, but I wish I would have hired someone who knew Cleveland better, just because of some of the stuff, and that we ended up having to go back and fix. But I think I spent maybe like a couple $100 publishing the book through Amazon. And that's when about the time I finally told my mom. And so, yeah, by the way, I wrote a book. It's coming out next week. And that's when I started telling people, and I'll never forget when those proofs came, and I opened it up and I was holding my book. I truly I didn't think anyone was going to buy it, and I didn't care, because I really just wanted it so that my 3 kids someday could say, oh yeah, you want to see it? My dad wrote this book, and even if it wasn't any good, even if they never read or didn't think it was any good, I just wanted to say I did it. And well, then all of a sudden, one of the beautiful things when you publish through Amazon is you can see how many people are buying your book. And I mean, the first week, a lot of my friends, just from me posting it on Facebook or whatever, a couple hundred copies in the first couple days. And I'm
Wow.
like, wow. And then I'm like, oh crap. Because now I know that not only are they buying it, they're probably going to read it. And then what if it sucks? What if my professor was just telling me like, oh yeah, it was really good, Dan, nice job. And then people are like, using it as toilet paper later or something. And, making fun of me like, oh yeah, he wrote a book. It was awful. And and I wasn't sure what to expect. And then all of a sudden, like the first couple, I had a couple friends that I work with who I've named characters after them in the sequel, because they were so instrumental in making me feel a little bit better, because they got the Kindle version right off the bat, and they were texting me and telling me, like, I love this character, and so it got me through, because I was physically ill. Because I was thinking, man, people are going to read they're reading this, and I didn't think I cared, right? I convinced myself I didn't care if anyone likes it until it went live. And once it went live, then it was like, okay, now I do care, because I don't want to look like an idiot. And then it just like kind of took off. I mean, that summer was wild. Thousands of copies, and like, I went on live on Lakeside on Channel 3, and there's the Morning Journal. Marissa McNeese, who's been awesome to me, she did a story on it, and my friends are telling their friends, oh, you got to read this book. Next thing you know, my mom's like, hey, did you know it's in the library now? I'm like, what? My book is in the library? She's like, yeah, there's like 5 copies. Well, there ended up being like 20 some copies in circulation at one point, and they were all checked out with holds on them. I mean, there was like as many holds as there were copies, and it was wild. And it was so cool that I immediately started typing the sequel, which I finished in 11 months, which was an even longer book after Edgewater. And but then as cool as it was, those first few months, it went up, up, up. Then all of a sudden it was like nothing. And it was like a little depressing, I'm not gonna lie, because now I got used to like selling lots of copies, and seeing that nice royalty check come in, and then the royalty checks were like $14, and you're like, oh, what's this all about? And I didn't do it, I never did it for the money, but still, the ego too. And out of nowhere, again, the whole dream big thing, and I know some people might think it's cliche or cheesy, but I just am not afraid to put myself out there. And so I started just contacting local shows like Jim Donovan's show. I love Jim Donovan. He's like an idol of mine. I mean, who doesn't love Jim Donovan? So I contacted I got his producer's email, and sent it and said, hi, I'm Dan Largent, and I wrote a book, and blah, blah, blah. And never heard anything. This was like October, right? And never heard anything. So then I was like, whatever. All of a sudden in January, I get an email out of the blue from his producer. Hey, Jim's going to start featuring local authors. And he's got Terry Pluto, and then somebody, I can't remember if it was like Leslie. I don't remember who it was, but he's like, a couple pretty big names. And he's like, and then he wants you to be the third one. And I'm like, me? And just, again, it was like, I almost forgot that I even emailed that show, and I never heard anything. So just because you don't hear something back right away doesn't mean that they're not taking that and putting it in a folder for later, and saying, okay, at some point we might have this guy on. And that's worked out really well for me. And when I went on Jim Donovan's show, I mean, I've done a lot of TV shows and radio shows from Cleveland down to New Orleans, and CBS New Orleans had me as their book of the month.
Wow.
You know, because a lot of the part of the book takes place, you know, with Hurricane Katrina and stuff, and that was awesome. But out of all the shows that I've been on and stuff, Jim Donovan, I realized, you know, just how powerful his show was, because my book had fallen down to like number 1200 or whatever, you know, on Amazon. I mean, it was on the bestsellers list for quite a while, like early on, you know, new releases and stuff. And then it like completely fell off, and as expected. That night, I think it went up to like number 38.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. It just from Jim Donovan's show. And that opened up so many doors for me. You know, and I mean, I was on Wills and Snyder, and, you know, and all the, you know, just once you're on Jim Donovan's show, you saw I was on Jim Donovan. And, oh, and you know, and he was as nice as could be. I took my daughter with me, my oldest with me that night. Channel 3's been awesome to me. I think I've been on there 3 or 4 times now, and they've been great. And Mark Schwab and Tony Zarella on 19 have been very good to me as well. And then I have I haven't been on Fox 8 yet, but I have some friends there who've been awesome. Jen Harcher and Gabe Spiegel have read the book, and they've, you know, like Patty Harkett and Michael Ray Guy. Just I'm name dropping now just to sound really cool, but
those are big people. Yeah. And I want to say, for those listening,
Jay Crawford.
Really?
Yeah.
He's from Sandusky. Yeah.
He actually read the book. He and his wife. And
no kidding.
I actually will likely. I was supposed to do his show before COVID, but we still talk, and I think I'll be doing his show as soon as they start. He said as soon as they start having guests back in the studio. But he's actually, you know, like, it's cool when you know that they've read the book, you know, and he, you know, so it's been wild, but it's been awesome.
I mean, that's an incredible journey. And for those of you listening who don't know who Jim Donovan is from out of town, he's the voice of the Cleveland Browns. So it doesn't get any bigger than that, especially football in Cleveland. And he's been the voice. And
you've probably seen the viral videos of him, you know, like they made the playoffs, and that made the rounds, and
he's the voice you hear. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, he's a legend in Cleveland, and he, like I said, we've been fortunate to have Tom Hamilton, Joe Tate, Jim Donovan, Nev Chandler, some just the greatest voices to me in all of sports. And we have him here in Cleveland. Very lucky. But yeah, Jim Donovan is for those of you not from Cleveland, Jim Donovan is the voice of the Browns, and he is a big deal. So that is awesome. And, you know, I have a couple more questions for you, Dan. And looking at being an author, again, what have you learned? So, you know, you wrote kind of on and off for quite a while, for almost 20 years, it seemed like. And then, of course, in 2017, you just buckled down and got it done. But patience, obviously, is, I'm sure, something you learned. But like, what about, you know, the rewrites and all? I mean, how did you go through that process? And what else have you learned from publishing these books and having this huge success?
Well, on the second book, it was about 50 chapters in, 45, 50 in. And I write shorter chapters. So when I say I was 45 or 50 in, I was about halfway through the book. And all of a sudden I went, oh my God, it's cliche. My plot line's cliche. And I hate that. Like, one of the things that I loved, that I took the most pride in the first book before we ever spoke, was that I felt that I avoided as many of the cliches as I could. And it's multi-genre. Yes, it's categorized as like a sports romance book, but it's also crime and suspense and other things. And so there's some twists and turns, you know, and I think I avoided being cliche to the best that I could. When I was writing the sequel, at one point I realized, okay, if I was reading this book, I would be sitting there going, okay, what, you know, and I hate that. I hate when I can predict what's going to happen in a movie or a book. So and as hard as it was, I deleted about 15 chapters.
Really?
Yeah. I just said, well, I got to rip it off like a Band-Aid, and deleted 15 chapters and said, I'm not doing it. Like, as hard as that was, it was the best decision I made. And even though Before We Ever Spoke had far more success than After Edgewater, if I'm going to be judged on a book, I want it to be After Edgewater, because I just feel like I grew as a writer in that book. And it's a little, it's not as fluffy as the first book. It's a little darker in some ways, but I don't know. I feel very proud of it. And it's like I say, commercially it hasn't done as well, but critically it's actually done better. It's received 5-star reviews from national reviews, and I think on Amazon and Goodreads it still holds a 5-star, which Goodreads, if you have anything over like a 3-star from all the people that would go on Goodreads and like to pick books apart, like you're doing pretty well. But yeah, it's one of those things where sometimes you can't get married to your work that you've done so far if it's no good. You have to swallow that pill and say, okay, this was crap. Like I need to reassess, and even though it's going to suck, I got to do it.
And moving forward now, do you have any plans to, author another book, or what is your plans now as a writer the next, 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, my plan when I was writing After Edgewater is that this would be a trilogy. And so I'm working on the 3rd book. I'm going much slower. I did not want this was just supposed to be like something fun on the side. And I don't make enough money as an author for it to be my full-time job. We'd be in the poorhouse. But begging on the street. But the 2nd book, I so badly wanted to get it out there that I really was just every waking moment I was typing and taking time away from my kids again, which was the same thing I did when I coached, where that's why I stopped coaching was, your kids are only young once. And I didn't want to, I was, missing my own kids' events and activities to coach other people's kids. And as much fun as I had coaching, and I loved coaching, and someday, I'll probably go back to it, I didn't want to miss any of my kids' stuff. And so I, with a full heart, totally stepped away from it. And I've kind of done the same thing with the 3rd book. I'm writing here and there. I get a chapter in here and there. I'm hoping that maybe by Christmas it'll be done. But we'll see. I thought for sure, and a lot of people said, oh, I bet you got a lot of writing done during the lockdown and the pan. Not really. Talk to any teacher during this situation. And I mean, the last thing I wanted to do when we were in lockdown, when I'm teaching from a computer in my basement every day, was stare at a screen some more and type. So I barely typed at all during the lockdown. Actually, I didn't even type at all last spring. I mean, I went, I think 6 months, but without typing a word. And I finally, this year started slowly getting back into it, just here and there, but not all the time. And the 3rd book will happen. And then I'm working slowly on another project, nonfiction, a memoir for someone that I think will be pretty cool. But that's another thing that's going to take some time to do. And I have other plans, I have other plans. I have other books I want to write. I'm constantly, talking into the notes function on my phone and putting ideas in there. And I'm a dreamer, and I would love to see my books become a movie or a series, like a Netflix series or Amazon or whatever, Hulu. There's been some people in the industry that have asked for copies, and I send them, and then usually you don't hear anything back. But I've also learned that, like I said, with the Jim Donovan thing, that doesn't necessarily mean it, that it's not, someone isn't sitting there going, maybe we'll take a flyer on that. Will it happen? Probably not, but you never know. And I really think that they would be awesome in that. I think it would make for a really good movie or series. But I'm also not banking on it. And if it happens, great. And one thing I've learned is with this whole process is, you just keep putting yourself out there, and sooner or later, good things are going to happen.
And I'll tell you what, you have a very unique experience. I mean, you look at your life back from, the high school and college days in Otterbein, and then of course the tryouts, and then getting into coaching and all the experiences of coaching, and then becoming an author. I mean, a best-selling Amazon author. It's a very unique story, and you're still young. So, I mean, you have a lot of time to go.
I don't feel so young.
You might not feel young, but in the last year,
I just
think
had
we
my
all
knee
feel about,
replaced in December.
I mean, the last year, I think, has made us all feel about 10 years older. But no,
Yeah.
but you look at your life, it's like it's a very unique journey. And of all the people I've had in the podcast, you do have a very interesting, path that you've taken, especially becoming an author now. And not many people, go that route and really had to be a best-selling Amazon author kind of out of nowhere. I mean, it wasn't something you really planned. So
No.
I think it's very fascinating. And, the coaching and of course your playing days. So I ask this question to every guest, and I'll always love to hear the answer to it. When you look back, Dan, 25, 30 years from now, you're retired, you're sitting back, watching your grandkids. What do you want everybody to know about the legacy of Dan Largent?
That he was not afraid to dream big.
I love that. I love it. That's what it's all about. I mean, Dan, this podcast is something I never, a year ago, right? No way I thought I was going to be doing this.
That's why I felt a kindred spirit in you when when you reached out, and then I pulled it up and I started reading up on it, and I was like, he's doing the same thing. He's dreaming big. Like he's just doing it. You just did it. There's I like to tell people all the time, like there's the doers in life, and then there's the people who talk about doing it. And I know that's cliche, but I like to think of myself as a doer. Like I sometimes if I fail too, like trust me, I fail at more stuff than I've succeeded at, and my wife could write a book herself on all the things that, have become my new thing that I want to do, like my new hobby or my new, venture that I'm going to try. And then I get uninterested with it and I try something else, but not being afraid to do it, just not being afraid to go for it. And you've done that. I mean, you're getting close to 50,000 followers on Instagram with the NBA 90s NBA stuff. Yep. And I mean, that's crazy, and just because you did it.
It's funny that you mentioned how you failed some, because I don't even look at it as failure. I mean, I know that you could define it as that, but I look at it as just an experience. You're just having experiences that got you to where you are now. Because I the same thing with me. I had a lot of, what you could look at as failures in the past 10, 15 years. I went to California for a little bit. I dabbled in music. I did all types of stuff that I tried to get into that I, didn't succeed in necessarily, or it didn't go how I thought it was. But honestly, Dan, it has got me to this point in my life, and I'm still trying out new things. I'm very much like you in that way. I mean, it's funny because in many ways we are kind of like kindred spirits, that I'm not afraid to try things. I'm not afraid to embarrass myself. But people, I mean, if you have an ego and you want to succeed, obviously, but if I throw myself out there and it doesn't work, at least I knew I did it. And I can say to myself, okay, I can go on to the next thing. So this podcast, I knew if I didn't do it now, I'm sure you felt the same way after a while. Like if I didn't do it now, I was never going to do it. So I'm like, just do it. And, it's turned into something pretty cool. And that's why when Phil was telling me your story, I'm like, I got to have him on. And it's been great talking to you. It really has.
Well, it's been a pleasure. And I when you asked me at first, I was like joking to my friends. I said, I'm going to be the least talented athlete to ever be on his podcast when I look at some of the people that have been on there. But I truly appreciate it, and I'm honored to be on here. And I wish you nothing but the best. And I hope you keep dreaming big. And I'm sure our paths will cross some more.
Absolutely, Dan. I appreciate having the show. And again, this is going to be, I know you talk about, we just said about being the least talented athlete. I don't think that's true, number one. But number two, to me, it's a story. I like people who have unique stories, whether it's an NBA player, whether it's a broadcaster, an author, people who have unique stories. I've had stand-up comedians on here, and, they're all not big time, but that's kind of what makes it unique, is that you see how they got to where they got to and their trials and tribulations. So I think you fit in very well with the people I have on the show, and it's been a pleasure having you on, my man.
Right back at you, and all the best.
You too, Dan. Okay, we'll talk soon.